glad you're here. Yeah, good morning. My name's Ross, and welcome to the dramatic conclusion of Adam's Family. It's a series that we've been doing, kind of focusing and angled toward family and type relationships. Really, most of it can be applicable to all sorts of things, but we've kind of been angling toward family stuff just because it makes a great series, and we are all a part of Adam's family. And so today, for the conclusion, we're going back to the beginning. We are going back to the original Adam's family, and we should not be surprised that what we're going to find exactly the same kinds of things and kinds of dynamics and issues that we have in our own lives and our families, because two things that have not changed in the history of humanity are God and human nature. So we're going back to start with Genesis chapter 4 today. This is going to be picking up immediately after Adam and Eve have disobeyed God for the first time, eaten the fruit from the tree that he told them to not eat from, and then they've brought sin and, of course, all of its consequences with it into the world. They've been banished from the good and beautiful garden, and now life is going to be still very much good and beautiful, but also difficult and painful. And here is then where we begin. Now, Adam had sexual relations with his wife Eve. There are still good things in the world, amen? And she became pregnant. And when she gave birth to Cain, she said, "With the Lord's help, I have produced a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother and named him Abel. And when they grew up, Abel became a shepherd, while Cain cultivated the ground. No indication that either of those are necessarily any better or worse or more noble or godly than the other. You need shepherds, you need farmers, that's all good. And when it was time for the harvest, Cain presented, and what did he present? You look at this, and if you just look at this sentence, this can appear very, very innocuous and could be indicating kind of nothing, but it just says some. No indication of quantity or quality, just apparently unremarkable sum of his crops as a gift to the Lord. And that could appear very unremarkable until you see how it sets up a contrast with the very next sentence. It says, Abel also brought a gift, but that's not just some. This is the best of the firstborn lambs from his flock. This is the best of the first. This is not an accident. This is very intentional and very specific. He has gone out of his way to bring not just some, but the best of the first. And so then what happens? Well, the Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but he did not accept Cain and his gift. And this made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. Now, even if you're not a Bible scholar, you may have some idea where this is going. If not, then we'll all find out together. But if this is all you see, it might seem very reasonable that Cain would be angry about this, because it's going to be evident that he knew what he was supposed to do. He knew the right thing to do, and he just didn't do it. So how many times has that been us, and you've been angry with yourself? I knew that I was supposed to do this, and I thought I could kind of skimp and get by and play the system, and now it backfired and didn't work. I'm such an idiot. I'm so frustrated with myself. That's been all of us, right? But this isn't going to be the case. And in fact, God knows that it's not himself that he's angry with. It's in fact not even God that he's angry with. He's angry with his brother Abel just because he did everything right and now is enjoying the accompanying benefits. And so, why are you so angry, the Lord asked Cain. Why do you look so dejected? You'll be accepted if you do what's right, which I think is God pretty clearly saying that Cain absolutely knew what was right, and he just decided to not do it. In other words, I'm telling you this kindly, there doesn't seem to be any particular anger from God here, but that really your now unhappy situation that you're dealing with, that's really just the result of your own choices, and that you refused to do what's right. Do what's right, and you'll be accepted. As simple as that. So also we understand now that when God says, "Why are you so angry?" that doesn't mean, "Why are you so angry with yourself?" That's, "Why are you so angry with your brother for just doing things right?" That doesn't even make any sense. And so you'll be accepted if you just do what's right. But then he goes on and he adds this. He says, "But if you refuse to do what's right, Well, then watch out. Sin is, and look at this really kind of incredible description of sin. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you. Although that doesn't have to happen, you must subdue it and be its master. And so right here in these two slides, these couple verses here, it seems like God is looking both back on Cain's initial kind of misstep, right? And he said, you didn't do what you knew was right, and so now you're dealing with the consequence of that, but that's just really the result of your own action. And now what you do from here in this now kind of suboptimal, maybe very disappointing, unhappy situation, you're going to be responsible for this too, because you can choose sin, it is eager to control you. It's right there, and you're going to be responsible for that too, or you can choose to do what's right, and you'll be accepted. So with this in mind, what does Cain do next? Well, one day Cain suggested to his brother, let's go out into the fields, and while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. He did not respond well. Now, skip down just a couple of verses, and what we're going to find here is God is explaining to Cain now what the consequences of this action are going to be. And now that he's become the first documented murderer in the history of his species, and it's that he's going to be banished from the land, and he's going to be a wanderer. He isn't going to be able to farm and cultivate the ground anymore. And here's Cain's response now to God's response to his murder is this. It says, Cain replied to the Lord, my punishment, it's too great for me to bear. And if you read, it doesn't seem like God indicates that maybe it's not all quite as harsh as Cain at first believed it was. Maybe, potentially. But how familiar is this? Here's what happened, is Cain didn't do what's right, and so then he had to deal with the consequence of that. And now he's in a difficult situation, and so what he chooses is again what's not right. And so then, instead of taking responsibility for his action, when it turns out that's going to have really negative consequences, the response is, oh, it's too much. I'm a victim. This isn't fair. Does that sound familiar to anybody else? Like, I hope you don't have literal murder in your family. I know it's a real thing that happens in the world, but I hope it's none of you. It's possible that it could be, but if you have kids, or if you remember when you were a kid, or if we're really honest with ourselves, we all kind of bring a little bit of this into our adulthood too, don't we? Is when we make decisions that are wrong or destructive, or in this case, just flat out sinful, and then we have to deal with the consequences. Like, oh no, it's too much. I'm a victim. We really are all a part of Adam's family, aren't we? And part of what's doubly tragic about this is it ends up with both Cain and Abel losing big. There are two losers and no winners, and there's absolutely no reason that there couldn't have been two winners. Right? Abel obviously gets killed. Cain gets banished from his land, so they both lose big. All that needed to happen was for Cain to bring an acceptable sacrifice in the first place, and then everybody wins, but instead it goes wrong for everybody. Cain manages to mess stuff up for both himself and his brother, and so that's really tragic, but it's done, it's happened, so there's no use being super disappointed about that. Let's see if we can redeem it a little bit in our lives. What can we learn? Let's ask something helpful. How can we now learn to do better than Adam's family? What would have kept Adam's family together and happy and loving each other and serving God? Well, of course, the easy, simple answer is, well, Cain just should have brought an acceptable sacrifice in the first place. And of course, that's true. But most of us, our families and our relationships, we're all kind of already a little bit past that, aren't we? We already have some messed up stuff. We already have some suboptimal situations. We live in the world where things go wrong, and frankly, we're a part of that. So in a sense, you could say we're already maybe in the spot where Cain's already brought the sacrifice that wasn't accepted, and now there's a difficult situation, right? So now what do we do from here? And the answer is so simple. And simple does not mean easy. You guys, these messages aren't all easy. You're doing great with the easy stuff. So nice work on those. This is so difficult. And I know I get to write these messages in cold blood, sitting in an office and not in the middle of some emotional situation where it's really tempting to do something that you're not going to really end up having wanted to do. But the fact that it's difficult doesn't make it not the right answer. And Scripture is so clear. We're going to say two things from here. Number one, you just be responsible for your own self. You do what you need to do. You be true to the God who created you and loves you and redeemed you. And then along with that, hey, just celebrate anybody's wins. Like whether it's your win or somebody else's win, just celebrate anybody's wins. In baseball, if one team wins, that means another team had to lose. In life and following Jesus, it's generally not like that. There's usually enough room for everybody to win, so just celebrate everybody's wins. And it makes sense why Cain would have been angry that his offering wasn't accepted, right? But it doesn't make sense why that was directed at his brother Abel. And if you go back and you look at just those couple verses that God spoke to Cain, what you're going to find, if you can count them up, at least in this translation, God uses the word you 7 times. 7 times. He mentions Abel and everybody else 0. It is 100% completely focused on, this is God talking to Cain. Doesn't need to involve anybody else. He just needs to be responsible for himself. And what's really amazing to me, this is fascinating, is that this is in Genesis 4. I mean, we're barely past the beginning. There's not a lot that's gone on. But if you go back just to Genesis 3, what you're going to find is actually the exact same dynamic. Do you know or do you remember what happens after Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that God told them to not eat from, and then God comes and he says, Adam, what's going on? What's happened? What's Adam's response? Is it, yeah, I did it. I know I shouldn't have done it. It was wrong, but I did. I blew it. No, he says, well, it was the woman though, right? It was the woman that, actually, come to think of it, it's the woman that you gave me. That's where the problem was. It's not me, it was the woman. And so God turns to the woman and says, well, and she says, but it was the serpent, though. The serpent, that's the serpent who deceived me. This is not my situation. And so this is amazing. You guys, seriously, of the first 3 people mentioned in the Bible, Adam, Eve, and Cain, every one of them displays an inability or unwillingness to simply take responsibility for their actions. So it shouldn't really be so surprising that we find that in ourselves too, right? Like, I'm not mad at you if you say, yeah, man, I tend to do that too. I always want to do that too. Honestly, that's kind of weird if you don't have some of that. It seems to be like this is just kind of a part of our common, altogether understood and shared experience as fallen, sinful human beings. And so here's what it looks like in our lives and our families. And one of the very difficult things about this is every one of these statements here is going to be, at least potentially, completely true and legitimate. So it sounds like this, like, yeah, I have resented my brother. Because when we were growing up, he was always the favorite. He was always the one that my parents treated better. I could never do anything right. He could never do anything wrong. They always took his side. If he did something wrong, somehow I was still the one who got in trouble. And so, yeah, it is a little hard for me to celebrate when something good happens to him, because for me, it's just a reminder of how I could never be good enough when I was a kid. Listen, if you grew up feeling like that, that's really hard. Maybe you are a teenager and you say, you know, my parents never listen to me or give me any slack at all. They don't have any idea what it's like to live as a teenager in 2024. They still think that things are exactly like when they were a teenager, which was like the 1990s, like it was the last century, and they never listen to me at all. It's ridiculous. Man, as much as I can relate to that, it was in the last century, in the 90s, when I was in that situation, but I remember my parents were not exactly on the cutting edge of society, and it could be really frustrating as a teenager. Maybe something like this. You say, yeah, I am tempted, actually, to be honest, to step out on my husband. But he's taken me for granted for 15 years now. And so when somebody else gives me some attention and treats me like I matter and like I'm worthwhile, well, you know what? That feels really good. Or I have been talking with a woman at work probably more than I should be, but when I talk to her, she treats me like an adult and not like a kindergartner, and so that tends to be a little more positive of an interaction for me. Oh, those situations, those are, I mean, they share at least two things. Number one, those are really, really difficult situations. Anybody can sympathize with those. If you grew up or are growing up feeling like your parents didn't treat you right and they have totalitarian-like power over you, that's really difficult. Even if you're past that, those were some of the most formative years of your life. Anybody can say that's a really difficult situation. If you're married and you feel like your spouse is the one who's supposed to be building into you love and respect and goodness and kindness and worth and value, and you're not getting those things from them, then where do you go for those? That's really difficult. But and this is probably for most of you the most important part of this message, because here's what happens, is it becomes so tempting to blame your difficult situation, your genuinely difficult situation. Your life is full of difficult situations. I know it is. But it becomes tempting to blame the situation than for your inappropriate, we should probably say sinful, and just generally unhelpful response. I know situations are difficult. The reason Jesus died is because none of us score 100% on every exam every time. But what you're letting happen is you're allowing the difficult situation to bait you into a response that makes things worse and not better. Just like Cain. Why are you so angry? Why do you look so dejected? Do what's right and you'll be accepted. But sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you. All of this is about you. None of this is about anybody else. You are responsible for your own self. And then along with that, you just celebrate anybody's wins, whether it's you or somebody else. Just something good happens to somebody else, you have a couple of options. One of them is to be petty and jealous and get upset about it. The other is just to celebrate that something good happened to somebody. How gross would it be if Jackson Mahomes got upset every time something good happened to his brother Patrick? Like, oh, it's always Patrick. Patrick's so good at football. Patrick makes so much money. Patrick's on all the State Farm commercials. Patrick's still with his pretty high school girlfriend. Patrick gets to hang out with Taylor Swift. You know what? One time, I wish someone would talk to me and ask about that time at Christmas when he was 8. Just celebrate anybody's wins. I know it might be difficult when maybe your already more successful sister gets another promotion. Now she's making literally twice what you do. Well, just celebrate that something good happened to somebody. Being unhappy when something good happens to somebody else is a terrible recipe for a happy life or a healthy family. Just celebrate when something good happens to anybody. Even if it's a situation where one person winning means you do miss out, it is still possible to be disappointed for yourself and be happy for somebody else. Just celebrate with them. Something good happened. A very fascinating conversation that John records, which I don't think I've ever heard preached on. So if you haven't spent a lot of time studying Scripture yourself, you've maybe never come across this before. But it's at the very end of John's Gospel. It's after Jesus has already died and been resurrected, and he's had a couple different interactions with disciples and people. And there's this scene, I'm not sure exactly how many people are there, but some of the disciples, at least for sure, John and Peter. And Jesus speaks to Peter, and here's what he says. It might even seem, this is kind of a little bit of a strange conversation, honestly, but it's pretty amazing. He says, I tell you the truth, Jesus speaking to Peter. When you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. And probably Peter, knowing Jesus well, is nervous that there's going to be a but coming. But when you're old, You will stretch out your hands, and others will dress you. That doesn't sound so bad yet. Well, and take you where they want you to go, which is we're going to be where you don't want to go. And if we don't understand that, John makes sure that we understand what Jesus just said. Jesus said this to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. And then Jesus told him, follow me. There are going to be some really, really hard circumstances. This is Jesus telling Peter that he's going to be crucified, which was the most painful method of execution that was known to that society. That's a really hard thing to hear, fairly understated. And Peter's response to this is so human. It's so you and me and everybody you know. Look at this. Peter turned around and he saw behind them the disciple Jesus loved, the one who leaned over to Jesus during supper and asked, Lord, who will betray you? This is John he's talking about. And Peter asked Jesus, okay, what about him, Lord? How about that guy? Hey, is this going to be fair? Because why does it seem like John gets all the breaks? Jesus, I was the one who got out of the boat and started walking toward you on the water. I was the one who said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. I was the one who a couple weeks ago literally swung a sword at a guy who was coming to arrest you. Where was John when I was putting myself in harm's way? Jesus, I'll do what you have me to do. I'll do it for you. But he had better not be getting some sort of island vacation retirement. Jesus replied, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what's that to you? As for you, the exact 2 words I just said, follow me. It's still so simple, but it's still so difficult. What does anybody else have to do with what I'm asking you? You're not responsible for him, but you are responsible for you. And I know for all of us, just like Cain, there's something in our fallen, sinful humanity that just cannot help but look around and see if maybe somebody else got given a little more than we did. I remember when I first became aware that I was watching black and white TV at home, and everybody at school and everybody in my neighborhood was watching color TV. And immediately I became unhappy with the black and white, which is funny because I would have been perfectly happy with it if everybody else was watching it too. So maybe I would have been a lot better off if I would have just worried about me and not worried about anybody else, right? Because all it did was make me unhappy. But so God tells Cain, you just do what's right. Jesus tells Peter, hey, you don't worry about anybody else, whatever they're doing, whatever's going to happen to them. You just follow me. That's all you need to do. Really, in 1,000 different ways, this is one of the most difficult things there is in life, is deciding to take responsibility for our own actions, to put away whatever sort of excuses and blame, and own your own behavior. There's a really ugly situation that probably nobody here is aware of. It's been going on for a while now. This is going to sound really strange to a lot of you, but there's something like a church investigative reporter who a few years ago began looking into and investigating a fairly prominent pastor and found a bunch of things. And so over a period of time, she exposed or accused, or however you would look at it, him of spiritual abuse, bullying, and some really shady financial mismanagement stuff. And after a period of time, eventually the church ended up forcing him out of his position as the pastor and leader of the church. I know this is really where it gets ugly and convoluted. More recently, he was then arrested for beating a 59-year-old woman in a parking lot in like a road rage accident. And his legal defense for his actions is that he had PTSD from this reporter who he felt like was out to get him. And so I can't be held responsible for my violent behavior because I was traumatized by somebody else. Well, now how about the woman who was put in a hospital for 3 weeks because she was beaten in a parking lot? That seems like that could be pretty traumatic for her. If she does something violent, now will that be his fault? And I don't even care like how a human court would or even should adjudicate that kind of thing. I know it's complicated, but God talks to Cain about himself. Just you do what is right. Jesus is clear as can be about Peter, even through his objections. I'm just talking to you. You don't worry about somebody else. Just you follow me. I know everything has mitigating circumstances. I know that we live in a world where everybody is on some level affected by everybody else around us. We don't live in a vacuum. We're impacted by all sorts of things. But you are responsible for you and your own behavior. When we all do this, when we take responsibility for ourselves, and when we just celebrate anybody else's wins, here's the very clear result is Adam's family, you guys, can be a so much better, happier, healthier, more beautiful group to be a part of. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much that although we don't always do what is right, that we are accepted based not on our own behavior or misbehavior, but on the righteous behavior of your Son, Jesus. Still praying if you're here today and you've never taken the step to put your faith in Jesus and his behavior rather than your own performance. It's as simple as can be. Just like Cain, every one of us sometimes does what is not right. And God, as the righteous judge of everything, to be a good and just judge, can't pretend that unrighteousness just doesn't happen or goes without justice. But that's why Jesus lived a sinless, perfect life, and his death on the cross was him satisfying justice, taking the punishment for your sin and mine. He takes our sinfulness, we take his righteousness, and we are adopted as children of God and his family. If that's you, just right where you say, just pray, say to God out loud or in your heart, and he'll hear you. Say, God, I believe that Jesus Christ came and died and resurrected so I could be forgiven and adopted as a child in your family. Please come into my life. Adopt me and forgive me. Begin to make me into the person you created me to be, and give me the life that you have for me. And as always, if you just prayed a prayer like that, it's not the words or the prayer that saves you. When you place your faith in Jesus, it's God's grace that comes to you through that faith. And he is the one who forgives you and adopts you, and you are a new spiritual creation in him. The best thing you can do from here is to let somebody know you're not created to live this life by yourself. You can go out to the point, that's just the corner in the lobby when we're done, let them know the decision that you made. They'll take your information. We'll be able to follow up with some great next steps for you. Or if you're online, send us a message. It'll be the same. For those of us who have been following Jesus, and this is one of these messages I feel like you could preach to any person at any time, and it will hit with something. These are things we all deal with all of the time in many, many different ways, whether it's a family member or a family situation or something else. Where is it that you've been so tempted to either not take responsibility for your own actions or to allow a difficult situation to have you blame that or allow that to bait you into doing something that you know isn't right when you just look at yourself and God? Those are going to be the two principles that matter at the end of the day. How are you behaving between yourself and God? Or is it that there's been a pettiness or a jealousy that maybe even springs from genuine unrighteousness somewhere, but that you've been letting get the best of you? And really the best thing for you and following Jesus is just to be able to celebrate when something good happens for somebody else, whichever it is, whatever God's speaking to you. Will you commit right now between yourself and his Spirit to taking that step that he has for you? That you'll be taking responsibility for yourself, that you'll be celebrating the good of other people around you rather than resenting it or being spiteful about good things in somebody else's life. And Father, we ask by your Spirit, you would empower and encourage each one of us to make these very sometimes easy decisions to make on a Sunday morning, sitting here in your church with your people, to make those into real Monday through Saturday life change for our good, Father, and for your glory. And always we come to you only and through the name of your Son, Jesus Christ.